Duke Ellington. Okay, you've definitely heard the name, right? Maybe you know Take the A Train. But what if I told you that the man behind that tune wasn't just some famous band leader? What if he was a composer so revolutionary that he didn't just write music, he basically rewired American culture itself? Well, let's get into it.
And check this out. The Australian composer Percy Grainger once said, and I am not making this up, that the three greatest composers who ever lived are Bach, Delius, and Duke Ellington. I mean, Bach. How does a jazz pianist from Washington, D.C. end up in the same sentence as Bach? Well, to figure that out, you first have to understand one thing. Duke Ellington absolutely refused to be put in a box.
You know, he actually hated the word jazz. He thought it was too small, too limiting for what he was trying to do. Instead, he called his work, simply, American music. And his guiding principle, his whole philosophy, a phrase that actually came from his collaborator Billy Strayhorn, was to be beyond category. And believe me, that idea started taking root way back at the beginning of his career.
All right, so our first stop is forging a new sound, from Washington, D.C. to the Cotton Club. So, where did this totally unique sound even come from? Well, our story kicks off in the kind of prim and proper society of Washington, D.C., and then boom, it drops us right into the middle of the Harlem Renaissance, at the front door of one of the most legendary clubs in American history.
So, here's the quick version. Duke Ellington, his real name was Edward Kennedy Ellington, was born back in 1899. In 23, he makes the big move to New York City, landing smack in the middle of the Harlem Renaissance. But the real game changer? That was 1927. That's when his orchestra landed this massive gig as the house band at the legendary Cotton Club. Now you gotta understand, the Cotton Club was a huge deal. And here's the thing, it had a wealthy, white-only audience inside the club. But they had weekly radio broadcasts. That meant the entire country was listening in. And what they were hearing, it was not your typical sweet, polite dance music. Ellington was basically using the club as his own personal laboratory, and he was cooking up something totally radical.
This new sound got a name, the jungle style, and it was exactly what it sounds like. It was exotic, it was gritty, super expressive. This wasn't just music to tap your feet to, no way. This was like painting a picture, telling a whole story with these sounds that nobody had ever heard coming out of a big band before. So, okay, what did it actually sound like?
So what were the ingredients in this secret sauce? Well, it all came down to the unique players in his band. I mean, take his trumpeter, a guy named Bubber Miley. He used these special mutes and these growling techniques to make his horn sound, well, it sounded almost like a human voice crying out. And here's the genius part. Ellington didn't just let these guys do their thing, no, he wove all those unique sounds together, creating this totally new kind of orchestral fabric.
Okay, next section. The orchestra, his instrument, a band of unique voices. And seriously, this idea gets to the absolute heart of Ellington's genius. See, he didn't just write music for an orchestra. That's what most composers do. He wrote music specifically for his orchestra. The whole band, that was his instrument.
Think about how revolutionary that is. He wasn't writing a generic trumpet part. He was writing a part specifically for Cootie Williams' sound. He wasn't just writing a saxophone line. He was writing a line that could only be played with the incredible tone of Johnny Hodges. His musicians weren't just interchangeable cogs in a machine. No, they were the very soul of the music. And then in 1939, he found the person who would become the ultimate partner for his musical vision.
And that person was Billy Strayhorn. Their collaboration would go on to become one of the most important, one of the most incredible in all of music history. It was a creative partnership that was going to last for almost 35 years.
I mean, just listen to how Duke himself described Billy Strayhorn. My right arm, my left arm, all the eyes in the back of my head, my brain waves in his head and his in mine. Wow, he literally called Strayhorn his doppelganger. Their musical minds were so completely in sync that, a lot of the time, it was impossible to tell where Ellington's writing stopped and Strayhorn's began. It was the perfect partnership. You had Ellington, the charismatic leader, the grand architect, the public face of the whole operation, and then you had Strayhorn, this quiet, classically trained genius who would refine Duke's ideas and, of course, contribute absolute masterpieces of his own. In fact, you know the band's most famous song, Take the A Train? Strayhorn wrote that. And with the two of them working together, their ambition just soared, way beyond just writing popular tunes.
Which brings us to our next section, composing an American epic, beyond the 3-minute record. See, their goal wasn't just about cranking out hit songs. They wanted to compose a great American epic. They wanted to blow past the limits of what you could do on a 3-minute record.
Don't get me wrong, Ellington was an absolute master of the 3-minute song, but in his mind, that was just like painting a miniature. His real goal, his grand ambition, was to prove that his American music belonged in the world's greatest concert halls. You know, right up there next to the classical masters.
And he started trying this really early on. Way back in 1931, he was already breaking the mold. But the big one, the real landmark, was Black, Brown, and Beige in 1943. We're talking about a 50-minute suite telling the entire story of African Americans that debuted at Carnegie Hall. From there, he wrote a suite based on Shakespeare, and in his later years, he created a series of sacred concerts, which he himself called the most important thing I've done. I mean, talk about being beyond category.
All right, so let's talk about the Duke's lasting legacy, an indelible contribution. After a career that spanned 50 years, what did he actually leave behind? Well, a legacy so huge, it's honestly kind of hard to wrap your head around.
You know, there was this legendary performance he gave at the Newport Jazz Festival in 1956 that just sparked this massive career revival for him. After that, he spent his final decades as a true global ambassador for American culture. He was touring the world constantly, and he was composing, writing music, right up until he passed away in 1974.
So how do you even begin to measure a life like that? Well, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History has one way of looking at it. 400 cubic feet. That's how big his personal archive is. And to put that in perspective, it is the largest single jazz collection anywhere on the planet. So what's actually in those 400 cubic feet? It is so much more than just music. I mean, of course, the original scores are there, but there's also 50 years of business records, personal letters to his family and friends, thousands of photographs. You've even got musical ideas he scribbled down on the back of hotel stationery and restaurant menus. It's the complete blueprint of an American genius.
And this brings us full circle. Right back to where we started, the composer and historian Gunther Schuller pretty much echoes that crazy claim from the beginning. He said that Ellington may one day be recognized as one of the half-dozen greatest masters of our time. Not one of the greatest jazz masters, one of the greatest masters of 20th century music, period.
So when you put it all together, the innovator who literally created a new language for the orchestra, the band leader who somehow kept a band of geniuses together for 50 years, the cultural icon who took his American music to the entire world, you have to come back to that central question. Was Duke Ellington America's most important composer? You know, all the evidence is right there. All you have to do is listen.